Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show.
His Dark Materials is a show made on the BBC and HBO, and it's all to do with the telly of the Philip Pullman book trilogy, His Dark Materials, or HDM. Episode 203, The Thief, starts out with Lyra and Will back in City Gazi, where Lyra's decided apparently without any real reason that she's going to rush back and talk to the science lady, but doesn't want to tell Will, because... who knows? Anyway, so she leaves him a note, and he wakes up and doesn't spot the note and can't find her, so he ends up chasing down Game of Thrones girl, who's clearly borrowed Lyra's keen fashion sense, and they spot a weird guy hanging out in a tower. This will be important later. Lyra on the other side heads back up to see Mary, the scientist, but oops, turns out the cop's there. Bad cop, and he interrogates her, and then when she fluffs up what she says and mentions Will, he chases her down the road, but luckily someone's passing by in a car, and it's Charles. Oh, okay, that's handy, and he gives her a lift, but then she jumps out and leaves her bag, but he calls her back, because he's a nice guy, but he's already sticky fingered the golden compass, because he's a bad guy. And Lyra mopes her way back to Will, and they decide that they're going to go to Charles's house, where he's waiting, because you see, he knew they were coming, because obviously he's from Lyra's world, but he wants Will to go and get him the subtle knife, which is hidden in a secret tower where there's a guy who nobody can get to. Sounds familiar. And Lyra and Will, they can't do anything else except agree. Meanwhile, back on Earth 2, Lee Scoresby's been chasing down Grumman, who's Will's dad, using a different name, and he manages to find some info when he's out in a bar, and it turns out that Grumman used to work in the town observatory. But unfortunately, asking about it gets him noticed by the cops. Still, Lee goes up to ask at the observatory, but the scientist there turns out is 100% magisterium, and he reckons that Grumman is a heretic, and because Lee asked about him, he must be a bad guy too. So the guy shoots at Lee, who ends up killing him in self-defense, and then gets arrested. And because she happens to be passing by at the same time, Mrs. Coulter comes in and overhears that Lee's in the prison, and then she goes to torture him. But he uses a bit of reverse psychology on her, pointing out that he used to have an abusive dad, and he can't be beaten into submission, and he can tell that she also used to have one as well, because she acts the same way he does. So she decides to do a wee jailbreak, and lets Lee skip off into the night, because she knows that he's out to look after Lyra, just like she is. So what did I think? Well, this wasn't actually a bad episode. I mean, it feels like the plot is actually starting to go somewhere now, and what's really interesting is that pretty much most of this is stuff that I remember from being in the book. I mean, it's a long book and I read it a long time ago, but I remember at least a little bit more than this, particularly like the bit about them actually getting the knife from the guy, but that presumably will happen next week. But after that, everything's kind of a blur, because I mean, literally, I think I read this maybe about a year after it came out, so that was back in about 1998 or something like that, and it's all a bit of fuzzy in my memory what happens right up until about maybe the middle of book 3. So for me, I'm really interested to find out what happens at the end of this, because that way I won't spoil it for myself and I can just enjoy it. But more on that another time, because obviously that's about stuff that's coming up later, because there was some actually really good stuff this episode. I mean, I really liked it when the girl from Game of Thrones turned up and she totally ripped off like Lyra's costume. Now sure, I know that was done for story reasons, so that Will would end up chasing her, and so that we get that moment of exposition where she talks about the guy in the tower, and also so that Will doesn't just go rushing off into the real world and get caught by the police. So yeah, I mean, there's story reasons, like constructed story reasons for her to do that, but I also like the fact that, yeah, she saw somebody with a cool outfit and she's copying it, because why not? And also the way that she kind of like clearly wants to impress Will, and she's sort of almost flirting with him, because I mean, why not? Teenagers, that's what they do. And also, I thought it was really funny when Lyra and Will went to hide it in that cinema. Partly because, like, Lyra was all about the popcorn, even though she thinks it's absolutely manky. And I can totally understand that, because I'm right there with you, Lyra. I hate popcorn, and yet I still eat it if it's there, even though it's nasty and bits stick in your teeth. Also, it was really funny that they were watching Paddington, and I kind of half expected Lyra to turn around and say some comment about, oh, look, a talking bear, so this must be a true story, or something like that. And also I like the fact that people shush them in the cinema, because, frankly, talking in the cinema is bad.
You're going to burn in a very special level of hell. A level they reserve for child molesters and people who talk at the theatre.
Also, surprisingly, I was really quite keen on that scene where Mrs. Coulter and Lee Scoresby had that little back and forth, for no other reason than it gave the good actors something to do in the show, rather than, obviously, Lin-Manuel Miranda spent most of the time just playing it up kind of goofy, and Ruth Wilson spent most of the show hamming it up like a panto villain. So it was nice to see them acting a bit. And I don't think this scene was in the book. Again, I'm a little fuzzy, so maybe I've forgotten. So yeah, comment below if you've actually read the book more recently than last century, because yeah, I just don't recall. But I liked it, and I liked how it explained that Lee can actually take a bit of a beating. But the trouble is, there's still things that bug me about this, and one of them is that Lee Scoresby is totally inept. I mean, he's absolutely useless a lot of the time. And Book Lee was not like that. And I've mentioned this before in last season. He was supposed to be capable. In fact, he's supposed to be pretty awesome. He's basically an airship flying cowboy kind of guy. And I think they got that down perfectly when they had him played by Sam Elliott in the original movie version. He was this older, gruff, really sensible guy that he would get himself out of bother, and you could rely on him. But this show seems to be almost worried that if it had a male character that wasn't either completely useless or wasn't completely evil, then the whole show might fall apart or something. And I know that's a kind of a weird thing to notice, but I mean, literally, other than, P.E., the guy who's looking after Will's mum, they're all either like baddies or just kind of dolts. I mean, last season at least we had a few Egyptians who were vaguely capable people, although they were minor characters and they were all kind of doing their own thing. But those guys are all conspicuous by their absence. And it kind of bugs me because, I mean, it would be nice to show a capable male role model in the story. Because, I mean, if I was a kid or I was a teenager watching this, I'd be like, why are none of the men in this story like my dad? I mean, he's not rubbish, he's not evil. So, yeah. But anyway, I mean, that's just my take on it. But otherwise, the show's still not bad. And I said, I'm kind of enjoying walking into this kind of mistier, foggier territory where I don't know exactly what's going to happen. So yeah, curious to see what comes up next week. So till next time, I'm Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions. And a special thanks to everybody listening, and especially my patrons, and most especially to Michelle Forbes and Judith Coloma, my top tier patrons. Thank you, everybody. Everybody stay safe. Cheerio.